Booker T at the MG's with green onions. Interesting thing to note about that iconic song from 1962, when it became a great hit, was that Booker T actually composed and wrote that song when he was in high school, just to suggest that many times we dismiss people and their talents because of their age. If only we knew what we were missing out on. But in high school he wrote that, and it still brings him massive royalties, I'm sure. This is Leid Stories. I'm Utrice Leid, and today we're going to get a little bit technical, and I want you to listen as closely as you can, because it will be the first in a series. We may not do it each day, but we will do it as it becomes clear what the next chapter ought to be. Let me explain. We'll be talking about this impact of the coronavirus. We have been encouraged to think of it in terms of how many people are dead, how many people are still suffering with the coronavirus disease, and stats and all of that. And it is important to understand that. But we'll take a slightly different view, and this view has to do with things that we normally are not encouraged to understand, and we're not encouraged to discuss, and we're not encouraged to see the connection. And that takes us straight to what, if we were to look at this in terms of numbers and in terms of the connections these numbers have to a global picture, what will that global picture be? And that is a kind of roundabout way to introduce our guest, who is one of my favorite guests because he knows so much. He invests so heavily in exploring what is not readily seen and studying it, and therefore is able to present a very different view that is seldom presented by the media. And I'm not trying to beat up the media here. This is just the way it is. Sensationalism, yes, they're good at that. You know, let's get the story of the moment. Yes, they're good at that. But this is a story, this coronavirus pandemic is a story that requires a different kind of understanding. And if we do get it, we will see the true dimension of this pandemic and what it has been doing throughout the world and how it has changed the world, whether we are conscious of it or not. So my guest is someone whose voice you've heard here many, many times. He is Charles Ortel, a Wall Street banker turned crusader, a one-man band, essentially, but this one-man band has shaken up the world of finance by looking at the sordid underside of what we politely call Wall Street. He was from Wall Street. He retired from Wall Street, where he was a banker, and turned his attention instead to the other side of Wall Street. Yes, there might be, and it's quite possible there is another side. It isn't all bad, but he has discovered and set out to discover a lot of what was bad about Wall Street and exposed it. And he continues to do so as a kind of personal mission. And in doing so, has brought to light stories that we would never have seen otherwise about how corporations not only function, but function with intent to rule the world, to design the way we live, the way we think. And this is, as we can see from what he will tell us today, it is part of the larger objective. It's not just about making money, it is about the larger objective of controlling people's lives down to the microscopic level, so that we are doing things that we don't know why we're doing things, or why are we living this way? Why are these things happening? Why do we have so many poor people? And we have so many people who are obscenely wealthy, and never the twain do meet. So, Charles, that might be a long-winded way of introducing you, but of course, it's the only way to introduce you, is to have to give people a little bit more so that we get to appreciate the body of work that you have done and continue to do in the name of making the world a fairer and better place. You have taken whistleblowing to a new level with the work that you have done, exposing the criminal conduct of not just the Clintons, but other people like the Clintons who abuse the world of charity and the notion of charity organizations, and make literally billions of dollars and supplant the law and make people's lives miserable. Most people would never connect the travails of the average Haitian today with the total exploitation of their country by outsiders, including by the Clintons. So we thank you for your work that you already have done, and hope that you stick around longer, much longer, to tell us what the truth is of what is happening, the seamy underside of what we call the world of finance. So welcome today.
Thank you so much, Tracy. It's a joy to be back with you.
Thank you. Well, today we will talk about ideology and money, how they intersect or don't, and how they are transformed into something else. Like what we're seeing now essentially is, cut and dried. This is the theme of most of the stories about the coronavirus and the impact it has had all over the world and continues to have, is, well, here's a virus that got out of control, somehow got out of control and is wreaking havoc. And that's about all we need to know. It's devastating. It is causing great grief, but it's still a story about a virus and little else. You have a different view. What's your view?
Well, I feel obviously for the people who have lost members of their family or friends to what is being explained as the effects of coronavirus. But even today, on April 20th, 2020, we don't have the type of granular statistics yet in this country and other countries around the world where we can think clearly about the number of people who may have been infected by this virus, and then the number of people who have died exclusively from the impact of this virus. We don't have those statistics yet. Indeed, New York in the last several days has decided to increase retroactively estimates of people they claim may have been killed by coronavirus. With all that said, the latest count is something like 40,000 people, and that's a lot of people, and I'm not treating it lightly at all. But when you look through available statistics that may or may not be accurate concerning the mortality per year, the deaths per year in this country, the leading cause of death is heart disease, up in the above 500,000, 600,000 per year. Cancer is next, 500,000. Flu, depending on the season, is 20 to 60,000. Suicides and accidents together are around 200,000. And we're not shutting the country down because telling people you can't drive in a car, you can't do anything for fear that there will be auto accidents. And we've got to keep things in perspective. I realize that driving a car is not contagious, but I think there was, in the very beginning of this, there have been a lot of mistakes made so far. Humans are imperfect, and you get 7.5 billion of us on the planet. We're going to make a lot of mistakes. But we'll park for a second the issue of who should be responsible for the spread of this virus, if anybody should be. Let's park that for a second. Just focus on what we have done. What have the bureaucrats suggested we needed to do to so-called slow the spread? They sold a model to the president of 1 to 2.2 million deaths if we didn't do anything immediately, and draconian. So I would guess that people across the political spectrum, if the top science advisors went into a Democrat, a progressive, a conservative, a reactionary, anarchist, you name it, maybe not an anarchist, and they got that information and it said, unless you shut the country down, 1 million people to 2.2 million people will die, most would say, all right, we better shut the country down. But then along the way, the story has changed. You know, it was COVID alone, 19, would kill 1 to 2.2 million. Now we see in these statistics that there are patterns that have emerged. It's unusual for a young person to die from either the virus or related conditions, but it seems that an overwhelming percentage of the people who have died had other conditions. The doctors refer to those as comorbidities, but they had hypertension, they had weakened immune systems for other reasons, they had diabetes, and they were typically, one or more of these conditions, they were also possibly obese. And as I think I mentioned before, in the case of my own mother, when she passed away in 2004, the doctors couldn't specifically say that it was this alone. In fact, they couldn't reach a conclusion as to which factor caused her death. So it's not unusual, particularly for older people, 70 and up, for them to have many different conditions, which, taken together by a triggering event like COVID, may hasten somebody's death. And so when I see casual, which it seems to me the New York figures were a casual decision to say, well, we're just going to add in 4,000 deaths for people who died and weren't tested for COVID, but we think, and didn't die in a hospital, and we think that those people probably had COVID. That is irresponsible in my view. I mean, that's totally irresponsible. Then we have to think through, of course, each life is precious. Every life is precious, is the way I hope most people think. And you don't want to trivialize 40,000 deaths. But on the other hand, when you shut an economy, the largest economy in the world down, and indeed most of the world down, and let's start on governments, and because we can make a sob story about businesses, but when you do that, what you're doing is you are cutting off revenue to the federal, state, and local governments, income tax revenue, all kinds of revenues, sales tax revenue. You're shutting all that down. You still have the workers to pay in the governments. You can't typically fire all those people. So you've got their salaries, their pensions. And our government system, when you look at the federal government and the states combined, has massive debts. You're talking $25 trillion. or more if you count the states, and then if you count the unfunded pension liabilities, you're talking about a mammoth debt. So when you make this decision, when the bureaucrats say, shut the whole economy down to slow the spread forever, until we decide to open it up, there's a cost to that too. And I don't think that has been thought through well enough yet. I think, sadly, we're going to pay the consequence of this imminently. We already see today, last week, I think, West Texas Intermediate crude prices were, I want to say, in the 20s. Just now I saw an article, there's $7 a barrel. I mean, that's crazy. I mean, in Canada, the oil price is now negative. They don't have storage available for the oil, so the oil companies are paying people to take the oil from the companies because they can't store it. That's an extreme set of conditions. I'm not aware of that ever happening in my lifetime. That's just one industry, and we can say what we want about the hydrocarbon industry. It employs millions of people when you look at the direct and indirect. So the economic consequences here are not yet fully understood. We're not going to see the scorecards, the financial statements for governments or for corporations for April. We're not going to see those results until July. Typically, for most companies report on a quarterly basis on a calendar year end. So we're in the second quarter that began April 1st. Many companies, compared to last year, are going to see revenue declines for April of 70, 80, 90%. And yet they can't pare their expenses 70, 80, 90%. There's no realistic way to do that. So you're going to start seeing massive losses. We begin to see around the world companies that are trading companies and speculative companies, they're going out of business. Firms that maybe should have gone out of business before are accelerating decisions to go out of business. And, so I just say there are monumental costs here, unprecedented costs to the economy. And at a certain point, I think it becomes irresponsible for two people, Dr. Fauci and Birx, and maybe the other two or three people who are trotted out there at the podium, to be the ones to make a decision that's not really a health decision. It's an economic decision. It's a political decision that's way above their pay grade. So I think this is from an investment standpoint, this is a very dangerous moment. You're seeing warning signs. The markets today have been fluctuating. It's not a monster down day, but it's a down day. And, bottom line, I think that we could be in terrible danger right now, economically.
So how would you respond that, well, you're a Wall Street guy. It is understandable that this is the way you were thinking. But is it humane to think this way? Is it compassionate to think this way? Or are you all about money on Wall Street?
No, I worked on Wall Street for 22 years, retiring in 2002. There are many wonderful people on Wall Street. Unfortunately, there are scoundrels in that industry, and there's scoundrels in many industries, and there's scoundrels in politics, there's scoundrels in the media, there's scoundrels everywhere. I'm coming at this not from a money issue alone. I'm coming at this from a geopolitical standpoint. You can't have national security in a country unless you have financial security. It's impossible. And I'm just saying, here's this rich target, this gigantic, bloated country, the biggest consumption market in the world, shut down so far for 45 days. We'll see how long it takes to reopen. And we've got a lot of people around the world who would like to do this country harm. And so we're vulnerable at this moment. And, in addition to dealing with the problems that we're dealing in the health sphere, we could have suddenly another 9/11 or some other crisis come and kill a lot of people too, because our adversaries and our rivals look at us on our backs. So let's take advantage of this. So it's not really purely a money I'm not looking at this alone as a money issue. I'm just saying when you make a decision like this to go from a relatively open economy to one where a small group of technicians and bureaucrats whose track records, frankly, have not been given enough scrutiny yet. I mean, Birx and Fauci were very much, as they bragged about.
I just want to insert here that you're talking about doctors Fauci and Birx who are heading up or spearheading for the Trump administration this whole approach to dealing with the crisis.
Yes, Dr. Fauci is, I believe, 79 years old. He's served in this area, I think in the National Institute of Health and Infectious Diseases, or in the area of trying to think through what this country, what other countries should do when confronted by highly contagious infectious diseases. What should the national response, the international response be? He's been at this for 50 years. And Dr. Birx, the younger person, has also been intimately involved in this effort, and they cut their teeth together trying to gain through and think through how to attack and arrest the spread of HIV into AIDS. And before we pat ourselves on the back on that, we need to remember that people were yelling and screaming about this risk in the mid-'80s, 1980s, and this country protected the very expensive manufacturers of branded HIV drugs until after Bill Clinton left office. So for, call that 15 years roughly. The AIDS activists were demanding that the prices be lowered. And ultimately, in simple terms, a decision, I think, a callous decision was reached, which was, let's keep the prices of high in countries where people and insurance companies and governments can pay these high prices, but let's lower the prices in the poorer countries because nobody's going to check there anyway, and they don't have the health systems in place. So when I look at not again as a medical person, but just as a numbers person and analyst, I look at the known facts and the body of literature here, and I see all kinds of calamities. I see our own healthcare system and the bureaucrats not bringing the costs down of these vital antiretroviral drugs inside the United States, to the detriment, to the loss of many hundreds of thousands of people who died in the 84 to the present under the course of action in which Fauci and Birx were centrally involved. Eventually, people started yelling and screaming that we needed a lot of money instantly, so the Global Fund was created in 2002. Tens of billions of dollars went to the Global Fund and other entities fighting HIV and AIDS. Dr. Birx is on the board of the Global Fund. Insiders I've been made aware of estimate that 75% of the money that coursed through the Global Fund, our government's contributions, other governments' contributions, was stolen. 75%. We see what people are saying about the World Health Organization. And so a real tragedy here for those of us who like to think through inequality issues and looking at it on a global basis. We got together in the United States. We take credit for being a leader in funding donations around the world that are supposed to be thoughtful and positively impactful. Where did all these hundreds of billions and trillions of dollars go? How come when you go into a country like Ethiopia today, or Democratic Republic of the Congo, which is a gigantic country, how come there are no doctors? There are no roads. There are no hospitals. There are no nurses. There's no electricity. There's no clean water. There's no clean sanitation. And yet, the World Health Organization, the Global Fund, the UN, our government, other wealthy governments, absolutely have sent trillions of dollars over long periods of time to these countries that are no better off today, or let's say their infrastructure is vastly inferior today to what it may have been in 1970. I mean, that's a real crisis here. So when I see, 2 or 4 bureaucrats getting up and saying, "Oh, we got it right away. We've got a new institution we need. We need to send $2.4 trillion into Africa to fight coronavirus." I said, "Wait a minute. why don't we account for the money that's already been spent? And why don't we hold the people who may have stolen money that was, as you mentioned, Utrice, there's no doubt in the case of Haiti is a specific case in point. More than $10 billion was raised supposedly to go to the poor people of Haiti, who are probably poorer today and worse off today and see no signs of that $10 billion. That's just one country. Imagine, I don't think it's the same amount of money in individual countries across Africa, but when you add up all the money that went to Africa, supposedly, went to the poor people in Asia, and then, send real auditors into the interior of these countries to say, okay, where's the hospital in the, 500 miles away from the capital city in Democratic Republic of the Congo? I don't think you're going to find one. So that, for me, again, I'm not looking at this alone as an opportunity to make money or an opportunity to increase income. I'm just looking at this from the standpoint of fraud, and in particular, fraud taking advantage of the most vulnerable people among us. The old people now in the case of COVID, sexually active young people in the case of HIV and AIDS. This is not a good track record. And, trotting out people who were centrally involved in the HIV/AIDS fiasco as those who are going to lead us to the promised land of COVID doesn't, make me happy.
So how do you convince people to take another look at the situation in terms of specifically what you're trying to bring them to, the consciousness of, it is not that you hate anybody or you like anybody more than the others. It is, we have to look at the track record here, and it is not good. So that you could literally be on point in saying an average person can claim with some degree of credibility that in these disasters, there's a lot of money being made.
Right.
Fraudulently.
It's
costing people lives and not improving anything. It's not a solution. What might be the solution?
Okay, well, so just immediately as you were talking, I was reminded in my mind that you were so nice to introduce me to that great lady Dottie Cherry, who wrote an article about Haiti, calling this phenomenon predatory humanism. I call it merchants of misery. What we have, unfortunately, is we have a system, we've inherited a system in 2020 that really, I think, started going the wrong way, badly the wrong way, in around 1988. We had in this country, no country is perfect, no human is perfect. We had a country with many flaws, present and historical. But nonetheless, by 1988, 89, when the Soviet Union and the Eastern Europe, the Berlin Wall fell and all that, this country was pretty well positioned. And instead of building out a footprint for the generation that followed, in the, whatever it is, 32, 31 years later, instead of doing what we could to make this country, American citizens are primarily responsible for America, to build out this country for the inner city people, Native Americans, rich and poor alike, to make sure that we had the resources in place to afford the possibility of a sensible education for those who wanted to get deeply immersed and highly educated. For those older people, a great healthcare system. Instead of doing that, what we did is we wedded ourselves alongside other countries to this idea of globalism, which for nobody successfully has been able to explain to me what globalism actually means. Because when I look at the data for countries, there's excellent data actually produced by part of the UN called UNCTAD. When I look at that data, the top 20% of the 200 countries in the world, so 40 countries in the world, account for substantially all the economic activity on the planet. our country is by far and away the biggest economy. However you choose to measure it, there are various ways you might. And I'm not casting aspersions on smaller countries. I'm just saying if you're trying to solve a problem, get it right first in the 40 countries out of getting 20% of the countries. Make sure you've got it right then. Do what you can to be helpful in the other countries, but don't sign up for just sending what I call conscious money. You write a check, you know you got concerns about whether it's really going to go to that child in some rural portion of Burkina Faso, but you say, you know what, I can't go there and check for myself. This brochure, looks pretty appealing, and there's celebrities involved with it. I'll give them $1,000 or $100 or $1 million, but whatever it is, and I'm not going to worry about it. I'm giving it away. I don't care if it's stolen. I hope it goes. We can't have that attitude. If we're going to give aid to these countries, we've got to have a mechanism for making sure that the barkers, the carnival barkers who appear in the television ads, aren't being paid a lot of money so that the scoundrels behind a charity, in the case of the Clinton Foundation, can run it so poorly that billions and tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars disappears through corruption, outright corruption, theft, and diversion in the name of what sounds like a good cause, helping the poor people in Africa, as an example. So one of the steps, I think, to start to think clearly about this is to ask yourself, do you care, as a listener, primarily about yourself and your family, or do you want to just forget about all that? You have a guilty conscience, say, you know what, I can't think about myself anymore. Instead, I want to think about 7.5 billion people. How can I solve the problems for 7.5 billion people? I mean, there's no regulatory system in place. There's no global system in place to go after somebody who says they're operating as the Clintons do in dozens of countries. There's no charity regulator that can figure that out. It can go to all those countries at once. It has the resources. They can then figure out which court to try the Clintons in. There's no such system, whether it's for a multinational corporation in the for-profit world or in the not-for-profit world. So I would argue we either need to, consider trying to put such a system in place, or instead of going down that track, we just need to hold, if it's an American charity engaged in international work or an American corporation engaged in international fraudulent activities, we throw the full weight of the American government against the fraudsters under our legal system, and don't waste as much time trying to bring 200 countries along for an international solution. That, when I look at, really, it's the bulk of my adult life, 88 to the present, and I see one generation lost so far to this philosophy of letting know-it-alls and experts sing the praises of their activities. Without me, if I hadn't caused, if this model hadn't come forward saying there were 1 to 2.2 million deaths, we wouldn't be here today at 40,000 deaths. That argument to me is I don't like that.
In that vein, how do you react to all this money that is being thrown around? And we're seeing familiar faces going after that money. In the Trump administration, everybody is practically operating as a solo entrepreneur. They have a hand in all the money, trillions of dollars flying out of the White House and of Congress. So many yawning conflict of interest issues. You can't help but come to the conclusion that yes, it's an awful situation. So many people are dying and so forth. But that is not the primary concern, it seems. The primary concern is, in as much as it's happening, let's make a lot of money. And we are in a position to do so. We control the political apparatus, which in turn controls the financial apparatus. we are sitting literally in a catbird seat. Why are we talking about models that work? The only models that we want to work are the models that work for us. We have so many conflicts of interest. We have so many instances in which there's just open and blatant disregard for the rule of law and even for the spirit of charity. And nothing is being done. It's Donald Trump's daily, you know, love me, see how great I am show. It's a very discouraging time to see this happening, and with apparently no major resistance.
If I could just, there are parts of your analysis I agree with and parts that I don't. So the parts that I agree with are this is now the third financial crash since 2001, since the internet bubble, or including the internet bubble. That one, 8 and 9, and now this one. And every day, petty thieves, petty drug dealers, this and that, get rounded up and sent eventually to prison every day. But when we look through these last three crashes, very few executives, both at investment firms, at banks, hedge funds, very few executives have done hard time. Yet, the corrosive practices that still exist in the investing world, the global investing world, basically it's the consequences of getting caught are puny, minuscule, compared to the spoils that can be gotten through gaming the system. And that is, I've been against this, since it really caused me to leave the industry, frankly, in 2002 in part. You can't have a system where there's only when there's upside for the insiders, but when things go wrong, you socialize the losses. That never works in a capitalist system. So that there's a part I agree with you. I think it's odd that on March 15th or so, the day before, roughly the day before the decision was made, I think, we were hearing stories about a labor market being so tight in the United States of America that there were more job openings than there were unemployed people. And the challenge, of course, is that the jobs are in different places than the people, and maybe the qualifications of the people don't fit the openings of the job. I get all that, but the labor market was very tight. And in scant days, it's, oh my God, American small businesses are responsible for the bulk of the hiring, which is true, and the vitality. These businesses are going to go fundamentally out of business unless they get, I guess the first handout was it $250 billion or $350 billion? I forget which. That money is already gone to the small businesses. Now there's another number that's going to go to the small businesses. And in this effort of trying to use traditional tools, just stimulus checks, deficit spending, and lowering interest rates, these are small pieces of the puzzle. They may temporarily limit the negative consequences of what's happening right now. Happening right now is going to change the way people think, the way a generation of people think about taking risk, about whether they should have savings or not, there's all sorts of behavioral consequences are going to arise out of this, which is going to change the whole way in which this country operates. So the traditional tools are only part of the equation. In order for this to work, for us to have a recovery, we have to address the vexing structural issues. Now, some people here, a case in point, a poignant case in point, is this issue under globalism of saying what we need to do is let's not hire Americans anymore. Let's source the goods from the poorer countries, the rising countries, and let's not worry about all the people we put out of work in this country. We're now paying the price for those decisions that really accelerated in roughly 88 to the present. And we find ourselves in 88, the Chinese drug manufacturers, there weren't any significant Chinese drug manufacturers in 1988, Today, Chinese drug manufacturers provide 100% of those people. Remember, the leading cause of death is heart disease. 100% of the active ingredients for pills that people take every day if they have high blood pressure, 100% of those are made in China. How in the hell did that happen? I mean, it's not like, China's approach and its strategic views are very different than ours around the world. And it's been sold by the academic geniuses that, China is actually the nation that matters now. America doesn't matter. They're going to be why would you ever, for an aging population, allow the system the drug manufacturing is regulated. Why would you allow this condition to happen? And I think one consequence, and who knows how quickly we can get this done, of this COVID disaster is going to be a lot of American companies are going to make a decision to rush out of China, come back to this country, and make certain key medicines inside this country for the American market, for export then around the world. And same for industries like software, data protection, data storage, valuable trade and intellectual property that is stored now in the cloud or maybe in servers in India and China. This is all going to change. And I think it's a question of how quickly the change will happen. Can the change happen fast enough in a positive way to offset the enormous damage that is going to happen tomorrow and Wednesday and day after day, week after week, so long as we keep this country shut down? So I remember back in business school, when we were young, we always had these grand ideas that we'd tell a professor we'd like to do this and that and the other thing, and the professor would say, all right, that's great. We'd like to get that accomplished in the next 3 years. What are you going to do at 2:30 p.m. today to fix this? These are the type of questions that need to get addressed, and I don't really see them being addressed as comprehensively as they should be. In terms of the Trump show, the coronavirus question and answer sessions in particular are remarkable. I think that you can fault Trump in part for making it be or seem to be all about him and his administration and giving high fives. I'm reminded of the George Bush landing the plane on the aircraft carrier. It's very dangerous to take credit for winning something when the war isn't finished. So I wish there might be a little bit more modesty at these sessions. But that said, it's remarkable to me the way in which this counterattack is being waged. It's not to say that we need to vastly increase the size of a bureaucracy. Instead, what they've managed to do is enlist the companies, many companies, large and small, that seem, if you can believe the statistics that are thrown out at these sessions, remarkable, swift progress is being made, taking, let's say, a General Motors that's supposedly making cars and trucks and say, all right, why don't you, in a few scant days, why don't you start making ventilators, which they may have done very well. All that being said, I just don't like to see this situation where the government, the central bank, is basically buying any security for sale. We don't really know if the prices in markets are realistic. They could be manipulated. The losses in the stock market could have been the real value of the stock market could already be a lot lower than its traded value. And I question how long we can operate as a country with interest rates as low as they are compared to interest rates across the world. So this is a point of, frankly, as I think about it, I have never been more concerned about the state of the financial markets and the geopolitical peace as I am than I now am. I've never been more concerned.
What would you say about the role, you mentioned globalism, but here at home we have the factor of nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
How are they interplaying with each other at this time? Is it a good combination? Is it going to spell disaster in the long run?
Well, I think, the national melting pot model, which has been simmering, some might say boiling at times, for decades in this country, where you celebrate differences and you try to come up with a patchwork quilt of everybody has different contributions to make to the great governance of this melting pot. That is a model that has served my immigrant families. I mean, my ancestor came from what is now called Germany, but came from Prussia. And my mother is a second generation immigrant from Portugal. When you embrace the idea of a melting pot, and then you try to bring out the best in everybody, and try to all get along, it can and does work well. When you go and in a nationalist model, we have a homogeneous country, and you start saying that, as happened in World War II, we Japanese are superior to everybody else, and unless you do it our way, we're going to kill you. Or in Germany, that is very dangerous and toxic. But melting pot nationalism, I would argue, it should be viewed as a model that seems to work, or seems to have worked, for all its faults, relatively well in this country over centuries, with obviously long periods of great pain and problem. But you think about this country alone, you think about trying to manage a melting pot, and let's concede that there are flaws today in 2020 with the American system of governance life. Why in the hell, if we can't make it easily right in this country, why would you want to construct a global melting pot, where it's now 20 times as many people as in the United States, and who knows how many different traditions and gigantic differences, as big as the wealth and income inequalities are in the United States. You could take the bottom 10% of this country in wealth and income, and it would be many times, or it would be multiples of the top 10% in some of these poor countries. So it's just to me, it's a headlong rush down a direction where I don't think we're ready yet as a population of humans to try to construct an effective system of global governance. I think what instead has happened is people created a global governance system after World War II that folks at the top hope nobody's really going to check. Nobody's really going to go down the blind alleys to find all the fraud. And I can tell you, just today, I have gotten people coming into me in different ways with different stories. A big story in Canada just now about the extent of the fraud up there. Country after country has rushed blindly into this global governance system. And it's the cronies and the leaders at the top of these countries that do very well. But the people get left behind. So I just like to see us return. Let's get the system of governance right. Let's redress some of the imbalances and flaws inside the United States of America. Let's concentrate on that. Be generous. Americans are very generous on giving money to other countries, whether it's government to government or personal to people, to foundations that give it to foreign places. We give a lot of money away. But what we haven't paid attention to are the blighted inner city areas in portions of this country that used to be the most successful of all, and particularly in the Northeast and in the Midwest. Shouldn't we devote heavy attention to making sure that the healthcare delivery systems, the educational systems, and the bureaucracies in the Northeast and the Midwest are running well with the resources they need, and that the regulations and politicians and laws and tax systems of these northeastern countries no longer strangle the interests that private sector people have in actually citing businesses in those areas? We've got a lot of work to do inside this country alone, and that's where I'd like to see us focus.
I would like to see that too, including a complete overhaul of this notion of nationalism, the word that is most often left out, in fact, it's seldom included, is the word white. It's white nationalism, and that's the formula that they're trying to perfect. Because whatever is good for white America is good across the board, and they have had this wrong for so long, and they intend to keep it that way. When you talk about nationalism, you should be talking about changes in attitude and customs and social norms. You should be talking about a whole new way of viewing this world, not in the compartmentalized sense that, as they used to say back in the day, if you're white, you're all right. If you're black, get back. It's the same formula that we're operating with. It is not accidental that in this coronavirus pandemic, a lot of the people doing the dying are people of color. How did that happen? Why is it continuing to happen? We have to do something about that, of changing this formula and confronting it head on. So we will come back tomorrow. I hope your schedule allows.
Of course, for you, Utrice.
All right.
It's an honor.
We'll continue the discussion so that we're building on what the discussion we had today, so that your questions could be more, I'm talking to the audience, that your questions could be more amplified, and we are moving along. This is a series, in a way, in which we are taking the same issues that are common to all of us and introducing ideas and information that just are not part of the topography when things are covered in the media. We haven't seen this kind of discussion really in the media. They tell you how many people died, how many people have been diagnosed, etc., whether the stock market is up or down, how many more people are unemployed. Fine. That's one side of it. But we have to look at things in a far more expanded way. And we are very lucky to have Charles with us to course us through, to guide us through, and to bring our attention to things that we probably haven't considered before. So, Charles, we'll see you again tomorrow, and we'll continue the discussion.
Great. Stay safe, one and all.
Thank you. I repeat that from me. Stay safe, one and all. And we see each other tomorrow. Thanks so much for listening today. And I'm hoping that you're making notes as we go about things that strike you as needing more explanation, or things that you wish we could pursue in greater depth. But it is just the idea of taking the discussion in a different direction from where it is. We don't need more of the same, although it's going to be important. We will know what the new death rate is. We'll know more about infections and so forth from the general media. That's where they're stuck. We want to be able to appreciate the enormity of this disaster in as many ways as we possibly can interpret it and cause you to think about it. Thanks so much for listening. We'll join each other again tomorrow. Bye-bye.